You are listening to Influencers from the Conference Board.
Hello, and welcome to this fifth edition of our mini-series, Business and Brand Building in Times of COVID-19. My name is JP Kuehlwein. I'm Principal and Brand Strategist at Überbrands Consulting and the leader of the Marketing Institute here at the Conference Board. I hope yours and you are safe and sane and staying in shelter as instructed. These are special times, and we're going to talk about them again today, and we will look again at retailing. Retailing, an industry that is much discussed as we look at the economic effects and consequences of the COVID-19 crisis, an industry that is central to the American economy. Consumption and buying is a key part of this economy, as you will know. And that was already an industry in transition pre-crisis, a transition that is probably accelerating right now. And it looks like big winners, but also big losers are emerging as we are getting, hopefully, out of this crisis. Now, previously, we've talked about retail with Alison Kane, and she talked to us about operating a local retail business. We talked with Richard Kirstenbaum, and he talked about national retailers from malls to brand stores and how they are faring. We talked with James Richardson about grocery business and how to try at least to forecast the demand in these strange times. Today, we're taking a new perspective. We're taking the perspective of the shopper, and we'll look through their eyes, explore their minds, explain some of the instincts that we all have as shoppers, and this to help us understand how retailing might change or not in the near future. And here, to help us figure this all out and make sense of it all is Paco Underhill, who is an absolute expert in this area. Hello, Paco. Thanks for joining the show.
JP, it's nice to get back on the Conference Board radar screen.
Excellent. Well, let me tell you just a few words about Paco. Paco is the founder and CEO of Envirosell. It's a behavioral research and consulting firm that has been around since the 80s, if I'm correct. I will get corrected if it's not. And he has shared the insights that he's gained through a lot of primary research in the area of shopping over the years in a whole series of best-selling books, namely Why We Buy. I love these titles. The Science of Shopping in '99, Call of the Mall, where it's about the geography of shopping in 2005. What Women Want, great title. The Science of Female Shopping in 2011. And he's got yet another book in the pipeline, which I think will be entitled The Future of Eating and Drinking. So all this to say, Paco knows a thing or two about what we're going to talk about, which is why, where, what, and how we shop. Is that right, Paco? Did I get that right?
JP, I have spent 30 years going from benignly ignorant to dangerously ignorant.
And you started at the age of 12, obviously.
Yes, obviously here. You know,
we chatted a little bit before this interview and discovered that we both spent quite some time in Southeast Asia, love some of the food there, curry dishes and so on, and have a shared obsession with observing people, particularly when it comes to shopping, to make that clear. But before we dive into that, knowing that you're operating around the world, where are you actually joining us from today?
I am in my apartment in the West Village on the Sex and the City block, Perry Street. And I am locked down here for at least another 2 weeks before I migrate to my Connecticut home in Madison.
Oh, wow. So, I understand it's the epicenter of culture and shopping. That makes total sense for you. But in a time of crisis like that, how does it feel to be in the epicenter of quite a different kind?
Well, almost all of us have reacted to the post-pan era, and either we are gaining weight or we're losing weight. And I am very proud to say, JP, I have lost 5 kilos in the past 6 weeks, eating out of the farmer's market, putting my mask on, and walking either to the World Trade Center or to the East River, and having a certain amount of anxiety add to the stress levels. My wife says I look better than I ever have in 30 years.
It's not a joke. I just read an article in the German news media about a government news report that they bring out regularly about nutrition and how people eat in Germany. And there is a marked increase in eating healthy, meaning a lot more consumption of fruits and vegetables, less meat, less quantity of food overall, more home cooking. So there are some positive aspects, and I guess we'll come back to farmers market a little bit later. But before we do that, I mentioned earlier you have a passion for observing people and environments and how the two interact, and I think it started fairly early on. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into it and what you can derive from these observations?
Okay. About 40 years ago, JP, I was a poor part-time adjunct instructor in a doctoral program in environmental psychology, or the effect that space has on people's behavior. My research specialty back then was in commercial zoning issues. And I spent a lot of time on the roofs of buildings installing cameras to record the traffic patterns on the streets below. I tell the story that I had my moment of epiphany on the roof of a 60-story building in Seattle, where as I was installing the cameras, there was a stiff wind blowing, and I could feel the buildings rocking in the breeze. You can't see me, JP, but I'm almost 2 meters tall. I tell a joke often that I'm someone who gets height sick with 2 pairs of socks on. On the roof of that building, I realized that I had to reinvent my profession. A week later, I was standing in a bank in New York City and realized that the same suite of tools that I'd been using to look at how a city worked, I could take inside a bank or a store or an airport or a hospital or a museum or a doctor's office, and I'd never have to go to the roof of a building again. And that's how I
Fascinating.
got started, which is, totally out of fear. And
Fascinating.
it
It
took me,
reminds me. Go ahead.
it was totally out of fear. It took me a while to get started. But part of what I found is, irregardless of the fact that I'd never taken a business course in my life, that if you can deliver quick, easy victories, the word gets around fast. And since that moment, for the past 34 years, we have been the principal testing agency for prototype stores and prototype bank branches in the world. We function in 47 countries, and we work across all retail segments, from department to luxury to discount to QSR. And we see some of the same patterns, whether we're in Tokyo or we're in Novosibirsk in Siberia, we're at a Reliance Mobile in Mumbai, or we're on Baghdad in Istanbul, or we're in London, Paris, or certainly New York or Mexico City.
Resonates a lot with me. One of my most exciting first experiences as a marketer was to work with an ethnographer, filming moms and how they feed their baby, showing them the film afterwards. and trying to elicit, all these subconscious gestures, behaviors, rituals, and maybe some of the thoughts that were going on at the same time. Very exciting. And later doing this from the favelas in, Rio to cramped places like Mumbai to rural China. It's fascinating to be out there in the field. Now, you summarized some of these learnings into principles that I remember learning at P&G from salespeople, like, don't do a lot of display investment right at the front of a store at the entrance, because people need to kind of acclimatize, and this is a transition zone. Place people walk to the right first, and then you should place new products to the right of the market leader if you want to try and gain attention and trial. It seems like a lot of this comes from your books and your observations, or you have made the same observations. Can you tell us some of these kind of fundamentals, the golden rules that might be of interest for the listeners here?
Well, JP, part of what I've been trying to sort out is what are the biological constants? What are the things that stay the same and are applicable everywhere? Recognizing, though, that certainly retail is the dipstick of social change, that for all of the things that stay the same, we know that what made a good store in 2000 and what makes a good store in 2020 are different, and they're a reflection of the evolution of us. If we go back to the biological constants, and you've alluded to some of them, first of all, 90% of us are right-handed. Our eyes age in the same way. The way someone moves at 25 and the way someone moves at 60, those differences are absolutely predictable. We hopefully love our children and we like our spouses. We all eat and drink. And even in a time of Corona-19 crisis, while the face of the monster of consumption is very much in transition, the body of the monster of consumption is intact.
That's fascinating. So tell us a bit about what about the monster is changing. I guess we already talked about some of this, like you're shopping in your farmer's market a lot more, even just because you're around it more. So some of the effects that are short term and some of the effects that will revert or maybe newly be born as underlying kind of habits that will stay. Can you sort out some of those for us from your observations so far?
Yes, JP. There are 5 trends that we have been pointing to for more than 5 years. And those 5 trends either are being accelerated or morphing in our present time of crisis. First is the issue of communication. We know that our visual or digital language is evolving faster than our spoken or written word. Through this post-pan period, virtually all of us have had to confront digital literacy issues. And the degree to which we are coming out of this process eminently more digitally literate than we entered it. One of the challenges for us in the commercial world is recognizing that affluence and digital literacy don't always walk hand in hand. And certainly those of us who are older in the plus 50 age bracket have had to raise the stakes in terms of how we use our phones, how we use our laptops, how we react to Zoom, how do we do our banking, how do we order online. Second issue here, and this is a really poignant one, is the changing status of women. Probably the most important event in the history of our species, JP, since the taming of fire, is birth control. I don't mean to make any religious or moral judgments, but certainly historically we sold women apparel, food, and cosmetics. Today we sell them everything. That some of the fundamental relationships between gender are being challenged. And I say that as a, aging, tall, strong man, that my role as a man in the world and my wife's role as a female in the world are certainly being challenged. And that's probably good. That said, in the post-pan world, women are facing a very acute issue, which is that with issues in childcare and with issues in children, how are they managing the maintenance and the ongoing caring for their children? I think this is a topic that everybody should be talking about, and nobody is. That across America, certainly, with each passing month, the number of households where women are the dominant bread earner continues to go up. Third issue is time. That part of our relationship to online shopping isn't just because we're enamored with Amazon. It is that most of us are desperately trying to multitask. It takes two incomes to support a middle-class family, and that dominant consumer is trying hard to be able to find ways to both save time and to save money. We know on the other side of this crisis that 30% of American households cannot accept an online delivery at their home during the working day or at their job. They may be a nurse, they may be a doctor, they may be a construction worker. We are challenged in our post-pandemic world with solving the analog end to a digital world and seeing how that works. Fourth issue is what is global and what is local. We know that as our economies open up, the way someone shops in New York City, the way someone shops in Madison, Connecticut, much less how someone shops in Beltrami, Michigan, a farming community, are going to be different. And that the challenge that merchants and marketers have is to understand what those differences are. We know before the epidemic hit that there were dresses that flew off the rack in Dallas that nobody touched in Philadelphia. Our crisis now is how do we understand what is everywhere and what is somewhere. And the final issue here, and this is, again, JP, a really tough one, is that the contrast between thems who've got it and thems who don't is getting even more acute. That with 20+% unemployment rate, and that employment rate varies greatly between the communities that you're in, that first of all, conspicuous consumption is probably not a particularly great idea. We know that there are an enormous number of people who both are financially challenged and are witness to the financial challenge are going to be much more careful about what they spend. And the challenge for us as merchants and marketers is to respond and to understand what those changes are.
Interesting. But before we get to that, we'll take a short break for some quick announcements, and we'll see you on the other side when I continue this conversation with Paco.
Can you, your team, or your company benefit from insights such as the ones provided in this podcast? They are immediately available when you join the Conference Board, a membership-based think tank that delivers trusted insights for what's ahead. Reaching across industries and geographies, we bring together our noted experts, senior executives from the world's largest companies, and nonpartisan practical research to help you address your most important business issues. Our membership packages are tailored to your organization's unique needs and budget. To learn more about our offerings, go to www.conferenceboard.org and click Join on the top bar to connect with one of our product specialists.
Hello and welcome back to our conversation with Paco Underhill, who's the founder and CEO of Envirosell. He's also an author, speaker, expert when it comes to why, where we buy. So let's take some of these trends and combine them. I think you're absolutely right. We live it right now that people are stuck at home. Just pre this recording, we talked about how the children are around and you need to now all of a sudden take care of them. You need to homeschool them, you need to amuse them, etc. And let's face it, reality is, or what we even hear very strongly through the media and social media is, it's a lot women that take care of that. But as you say, they're also the ones increasingly working, being the key bread earners, i.e. this traditional structure going away with the male automatically by default being the breadwinner who goes out and then comes home in the evening to be served dinner. If we combine that with our increasing digital savviness or literacy, I think you call it, would that point us to most of the shopping will end up being e-commerce shopping, meaning you see the product on the screen and the next thing you know, it's going to show up at your doorstep or in the future probably already put into your fridge or into your closet. When and where do you still see the human, you say it's behavioral, it's psychological, the human, the behavioral, the psychological need to actually go into a physical environment and roam and discover and shop? And how frequent is that going to be in the future?
Okay, JP, part of what is very important to understand is that there, in the consumer's mind, there is no distinction between the online world and the physical world as it comes to shopping. That since we have the phone in our hands, even if we are in a physical world, we are also in a digital world because we can access information, we can access pricing. We also know that our relationship to consumption is very much tied to age. JP, how old are you?
Let's just put it at I'm over 50.
Okay. Me too. Once we reach age 40, roughly, 80% of our weekly purchases are the same thing. We have already decided that we like the Grey Poupon mustard, not the golden mustard, that we like 2% milk, not whole. We know the dog food we like. We know the laundry soap that we prefer. Why do we have to go to the store to secure any of those commodity purchases? But we also know that there are things that we feel very strongly that as we consume, we need to curate. I like to pick out the vegetables. I like to pick out the meat. I like to be able to shop for gifts for my friends or my loved ones. So one of the things that we're looking at is there a way for retail to recognize that there are some things that we need to smell, touch, see, listen to, and rather than try and have the consumer come to us, is there a way for us to go to them? Because part of what we can do now is we can put a store, for example, into an airport where we get to interact with something. We may even be able to try something on, but we don't necessarily have to walk away with it because we can use a digital fulfillment network. What if there's a tractor trailer truck that expands out into a store that we can take into the parking lot of the Minnesota Twins game, or we can take to a golf tournament, or we can take into Central Park, and knowing that our customers are there and we can find them rather than us finding us. Right. That our digital world is not just about digital, big digital. It's about physical using digital as a way of making it easier, better, and often cheaper for the consumer to acquire goods.
Right. So the super busy woman, the digitally literate, the crunch for time, if we put it all together, then increasingly shoppers will curate their shopping behaviors and will say everything that is maintenance, I want to come to me, and it's going to be the path of least resistance, time wasted, and at the end, of course, also money always playing a role. But then you say there are items and moments and emotional needs that will preserve us wanting a physical environment and curation and not immediate delivery and subscription services, etc. Do I get that right?
Well, yeah, JP, I recognize also that when we move to a digital world in terms of commodity purchases, part of what it liberates us from is the kind of packaging that historically we have used through the 20th century. That whether it's recyclable packaging or whether it's repurposed packaging, it gets us to a better ecological future with less waste.
Right, right. Um, you also talked about conspicuous consumption and how the crisis might affect that, just like it did, by the way, in the last crisis, 2008 financial crisis, with conspicuous consumption, at least for a while, not being very favorably seen in general, and particularly with this continuing very unfortunate trend of the incredible polarization of societies, where very, very, very few people, have the wealth of a lot of the people at the bottom of society, and an increasingly poor middle income and low income section of the population. However, aren't there also psychological needs when it comes to conspicuous consumption and when it comes to luxury and lifestyle? I.e., we talk about affordable luxury and how people put on that lipstick. Is that really going away? It didn't go away last crisis. Don't you think it's just going to change in how it is expressed? Don't you think that, I don't know, buying a Peloton stationary bike for home or other expressions are the replacement for maybe some of the more ostentatious luxury of the past?
I think part of what we're going to look at is if I have the choice between giving people a piece of jewelry and giving them a tub of caviar or a very expensive bottle of whiskey, that part of what the luxury goods consumption is going to be about is what can I use or do with right now. JP, there was a very poignant moment that I witnessed in the past week. I was walking through the garment district in New York about 7:00 at night. And I saw all of the homeless people camped out in doorsteps, camped out under awnings. And then driving down the street was a absolutely stunning, beautiful Rolls-Royce limousine with New Jersey plates on it. And I looked at that car and go, when is one of these people sleeping on the street going to pick up a rock and throw it? We see some of that anger coming out on the streets of Minnesota just in the past couple of days. There's an anger there about what has happened, our present political situation. And I think part of what that means is that if you want to consume ostentatiously, at least do it in private and not in public.
Mm-hmm. And if we then talk about consumption of luxury goods, don't they need to create an experience? There was a lot of talk in the 90s and early 2000s about experiential marketing, and luxury brands were often the pioneers there in creating their own stores, their own experiences, together
JP,
with probably the entertainment industry. Can that truly be replaced by a digital website, or will these lifestyle and luxury industries continue to be at the forefront of creating physical environments and physical experiences?
okay, JP, let's go from being on the ground to 50,000 feet up. We passed over a very magic moment in the history of money in the mid 1990s. And up until that point, the overwhelming majority of global wealth was in the hands of an aristocracy, people who had inherited the money through their families. And that was the anchor through the 1990s of what the luxury goods markets were. The French, the Italians had a history of selling to an aristocracy. In 2020, the overwhelming majority of global wealth is in the hands of people who earned it in the course of their own lifetimes. And part of what that means is that while there are some things that new money understands, they understand the difference between a Fiat and a Maserati. But there are lots of things that new money doesn't understand. What is the difference between a t-shirt bought at Primark and a t-shirt bought at Selfridges? And that part of the reason why the luxury goods industry started to open their own stores is that they no longer wanted to communicate with their customer through the interpreter of the department store. That they realized that in order to communicate value, they needed to educate. And that educational need was done eminently more functionally within the context of their own store as opposed to somebody else's. Doesn't that make sense, JP?
I understand that. I guess my question, Paco, is whether this education and this experience that drove luxury brands to physical stores can be replaced by virtual experiences, or if there is something in the psyche, in our psychology, that values and that drives us to want a physical experience, I guess is my question.
Okay, I think JP, there may be some things in the luxury goods repertoire that can be certainly supported by some form of online presence. But we also know that much of the value of luxury goods comes from us being able to use a broader array of senses to be able to experience it. So,
Okay.
for example, one of the things that in the broader luxury goods market that was a major trend up until this epidemic hit is tourism shopping. That somebody would make the journey from whether it's Azerbaijan or Iran or China to either New York and London, and part of what they brought with them was their wallets to go shopping, that they had been exposed to goods online, and that their digital literacy told them that it was cheaper to acquire those goods in London, Paris, or New York than it might have been in Shanghai or Tehran or Baku. Now, is that tourism shopping going to come back? And the answer is yes, but nowhere near the degree to which it was in the pre-COVID-19 world. Listening to the luxury goods experts, they are thinking that even when transportation opens back up, that consumption rate of tourism shopping is going to drop off by 20 or 30%, and that the luxury brands are going to struggle finding ways to be able to both communicate value and to make that value accessible to a public that has some appetite for it.
Interesting. Now, we're already running out of time. It's always the same thing when you're having fun. But I want to circle back to kind of where we started from and want to work back from luxury goods to maybe leeks and apples and salads. You wrote a little article in the Robin Report, I think it was, about shopping the farmers market in Union Square. And there you gave a little bit of an outlook where I think in your perspective or in your mind, a positive development, you think that this way of shopping and this way of cooking and nutrition is kind of coming back. And obviously the crisis seems to have accelerated that. To finish us up on a positive note, do you see some other trends that you consider very positive that this crisis might have kicked in gear or reoriented to the positive side or accelerated like that?
And one of the things that I'm very enamored with here is that in our 21st century world, that our digital revolution not only has helped us get global, it's helped us get local. So I just did an interview for my new book with a farmer in upstate New York. He is operating a farm out of about 6 acres, meaning it is from the standpoint of traditional 20th century agriculture, it's tiny. He is able to operate a greenhouse with solar panels. He is raising chickens, he's raising vegetables, and he is able to sustain a family with a very decent middle class income, doing something that even 20 years ago would have been viewed as absolutely impossible. He has cut out the middleman, meaning that there's not a distributor that comes and buys his eggs and arugula from him, because he's found a way to sell them directly to the consumer. I go to the farmers market, and the farmers are starting to process their crops. Whether it's somebody who historically grew potatoes that is now making small batch vodka and being able to sell it at an extraordinary premium, is running taste tests in the Union Square market and giving Absolute and Belvedere a run for their money. I think there are many of us that are looking at our world and going, consuming locally across a broad spectrum of products here may not be such a bad idea. And as I climb on the scale and look at the 5 kilos that I've lost, and think about the fact that many of us are being reacquainted with consuming seasonally. Do you know there's a school of French history called the History of Everyday Things, which talks about consumption from the standpoint of ordinary people? And that the French peasant of the 18th and 19th century, over the course of a year, would eat 60 different things. Whereas those of us who were locked into the late 20th century world have a very difficult time getting beyond 30.
Right.
I have discovered watermelon radishes that have become my favorite winter vegetable. And how come it took me 68 years to be able to find them?
Right.
JP, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
I was going to say, it sounds a little bit like Back to the Future, but in some ways, being a very good thing. The worry, I think you also mentioned earlier, is that maybe this future is a little bit of a luxury future that unfortunately not everyone will be able to afford. So I think that opens up opportunity for continuation of this discussion. But thanks a lot, Paco, for sharing these insights. Where can people continue to access your expertise? How can they get in touch with you?
Two ways here. There is pacounderhill.com and there is Envirosell.com, which is the name of my firm. That's ENVIROSELL.com. We have white papers that are downloadable, and we have a very active practice, both in research and advisory services that stretch across the Fortune 50 companies, but also to small and local merchants across the planet.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Paco, and thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in. If you found this episode insightful, you liked it, then you know the spiel. Tell all your friends, colleagues, family about it. Like us, subscribe to us, comment, rate. And you will find a lot of other podcasts by the conference board on our website. You just go to conference-board.org/podcasts to access all those episodes. And with that, I want to say thank you again and goodbye, Paco. Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen, JP. Dankeschön.
This has been Influencers from the Conference Board.